Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm talking about fast tabletop role-playing game combat. So I've been thinking a lot about fast tabletop role-playing combat, and the goal is you have four NPCs, you have four player characters, you have enemy NPCs between 1 and 19. That combat needs to run between, that describes 99% of all combats that happen in tabletop role-playing games. So if we solve that, that will solve the main problem of tabletop role-playing games playing too long. So, which is a huge problem. It's limiting our audience, so forth. So, with that said, here's where I'm heading from a concept perspective to solve this in the game that I'm designing. Okay, so that would be here's where I would go. So the first thing I thought of is every single combat just needs to have a start, a middle, and an end, right? That makes a lot of sense. I think that is it's a really good start, right? I think, and the reason why was it made logical sense to me. But the more I thought about it, it might be a bad idea. And the reason why is we're already there with Dungeons and Dragons. I've played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons games, more than I can count, and I've definitely lost track. It's in the hundreds. And one of the things I've seen is it is unbelievably rare for a D&D. Almost all D&D combats are the same. They're three rounds. So it's very, very rare for a combat to go more than 3 rounds, and it's very, very rare for a combat to go less than 2. So they're almost always, they're really almost always 3 rounds. And so if we're just replacing the 3 rounds of Dungeons and Dragons with middle start with start, middle, end, are we really making progress there? So I was thinking, so we need to really break it down. What causes these things to run so long, right? And I think one of the reasons why is every player has a turn. That's a problem. And again, in order to get here, I'm going to say some things that might upset people. Because we have to really think about what have we been doing that makes these combats last 2 to 3 hours long. Well, one is we let every player have a turn. That's a standard, and then you just repeat that every round. And every tabletop role playing game in the world has repeated this issue. Every player has a turn. You spin the dial. Player, non-player character, non-player character, non-player character. So this is taking a long time. So I was thinking. Here was my thought. 1, engagement, which is the first, which is the start of the combat, and then resolution. So 2 steps. It's engagement and it's resolution. So you're really only going to be touching, so that would get rid of 1 entire round that's in most D&D games. The other issue is the idea that every player fights, okay? Every player has a turn in combat. Here's the issue. There are players who really don't care about combat at all. They're there for RP. And so for a long time, we've been making them take their turn in combat when they really don't want to, right? Like that just seems, why are we doing that, right? So that seems silly, especially when, there's somebody in there like, yeah, I'm going to cast my fireball. It does, if somebody isn't really engaged and doesn't enjoy combat, why are we having them take their turn in combat? It doesn't make sense, right? So what I would say is you don't need to incent anyone to take their turn in combat. There are a lot of players who play the game for combat. So what I am proposing is 1, you give an incentive for players to skip their turn in combat, and that incentive would be just high enough so that if there's somebody who has very little interest or no interest in doing combat, you can take them out of the round, right? And then you can move on. Now, what about game balance? If you have a character in there and they're going to be able to, if you have a wizard and that wizard really doesn't like combat, he's really there to do RP, right? Well, what about his fireball? You should get a fireball every combat from him, right? And that's the thing is, I think what I would do is I would say every player has a standard combat role, and they say, okay, I'm taking the incentive to be out of combat, and so my character's going to get a 50 XP for extra XP for not contributing to the combat, for not for my player not participating in the combat, but my character will participate in combat, and I'm going to use a standard block, right? And so for the wizard, the standard block is he does one missile, one magic missile, and one fireball, right? And then the game master just applies that and says, this mook, whichever is the weakest NPC, this mook we start combat. The moment combat engages, this goes at the top of the round, and this character is damaged by this, and this character is damaged by this, okay? And that way, and here's the other thing is, you might have, this has incredible utility in my opinion. So one, you leave combat to the people that care about it, right? And you're not making people do combat when they really don't want to do combat, right? It speeds up the game. It makes the people who want to do combat not have to feel like they're rushed to do it really, really quickly, because now already the combat is going to be shorter, right? And so they don't have to feel like they're rushed. The other issue is you might have players who are all about combat, right? But that week, their girlfriend broke up with them, and they're just not in it. Their head's not there, right? That person can join in, enjoy the game, right? Not have to be thinking about a million different stats, and have a way that their character can contribute to combat, but their character contributes to combat, but their player is not actually actively engaged in combat and is not taking extra time. So that's my idea, is two ideas there. One, shrink combat to engagement and resolution. That's 2 steps, gets rid of an entire round for most Dungeons & Dragons combats. And then 2, not every player participates in combat. Every character participates in combat, but players participate in combat by choice, and there is actually an incentive to not contribute to combat, so that the people who are sitting out and just enjoying the RP, they don't have to feel guilty about that. It's actually a benefit to the game, and we should reward them to it. It's just an idea. I'm still percolating this around. Love to know your guys' thoughts. Take care. Bye-bye.